Melinda, and welcome to Web of Stories. I am back in my daughterless setup today. Reason being, my daughter and I just did this whole video outside and my mic wasn't working and you couldn't hear me, and I want to get this done. So it's just hot in our house. It's a day. So I thought, you know what? I'm just going to do this. She's fine with it. If you hear anything in the background, that's my kids watching The Simpsons. So excuse me while I open carbonated water. Anyway, I am here with some spicy opinions. I've just come across some things lately in sort of the bookish world, not on BookTube, so I'm not accusing anybody on BookTube, but just things that I have seen people on message boards or people say on podcasts, or maybe it's just some general things that kind of make my blood boil, and I want to address them. Now, some of you might not agree with what I'm about to say, and that's fine, and I am open to discussing any of these. I just ask that you be respectful in the comments. That's all. I am a very reasonable person, and I can have a reasonable discussion with you if you don't. And if you don't agree with me, I do want to hear about it, because I'd like to get some other opinions. But these are the things that kind of make my blood boil at the moment. Also, allergy season's high, so I'm dealing with some dry mouth. So I'm going to be drinking grape Waterloo, which is, in my opinion, the best. Not sponsored. Unless they want to sponsor me, then, you know, yeah, we can make it work. So, also, when I did the first run of this video outside with my daughter, I realized there were some things that were on my original list that I'm really not that upset about. So, hopefully this will be a shorter video, and I can direct my frustration more particularly. So I have like 4 or 5 things, and they're in the, like, I'm trying to order them in like mild to muy picante scale of spicy opinions here. So let's get going. Now, most of these deal with genres, and by genre I generally mean prose fiction. I'm not worried about nonfiction or anything like that right now. So my first thing is, I call this the can we nots. Can we not say these things? There are some terms that I hear a lot in the bookish conversation that I'd like us to just not use, to just take out of our bookish dialogue when talking about books. So the first one is women's fiction and its predecessor, chick lit. I know I'm not alone on this one. I know that this is just this is very offensive. And I understand it. I'm with you. So this is like the safest opinion I have on here. What makes women's fiction women's fiction? I will tell you what makes women's fiction women's fiction in the eyes of the people who'd make that decision. It is lighter fiction that should be more appealing to women and their more frivolous minds. And that's incredibly offensive. Yeah. I don't need anyone's pity. I'm probably smarter than most of the people making these decisions. And yeah. Also, what's wrong with men reading these books? Men can read these books. I know a lot of men who've read books like Where the Crawdad Sings. I know men who've done that. Yes, more women than men have, but it's marketed that way, so you can't get too upset about it. Women's fiction is fiction. And it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, and we don't need the signifier women's in front of it, because we aren't some special class of citizen that needs, to be separated out because we're just so delicate. So, more noise is gonna be my cat, because let's just add to it all. So the next one kind of goes with it, but it's a little bit of a different take. And this is another one that just drives me crazy. Dad books. So the idea behind a dad book is, it's a book, it's usually like a nonfiction history book, generally about World War II. I don't want World War II. But these are books that people, these are a good book for your dad as a gift. You can give them this because dads like this. I'm sure a lot of dads like it. A lot of moms like them too. A lot of people who are neither moms nor dads like them. What makes them a dad book? And here's the thing. These are books that tend to be nonfiction. They tend to be history, not always history, but lots of times. They tend to be more cerebral. So you know how I said that women's fiction and chick lit have a very derogatory aura about them. They're not nice terms. When someone calls something women's fiction, it's not nice. It's not a compliment. But saying something's a dad book doesn't have that. Why not? If it's so bad to be, if you have to like separate women out for books, why don't you have to separate dads out for books? So yeah, there's another big problem on mine. And I think dad books is just, because I know a lot of dads, as I said, there are people who aren't dads who like these books. And my dad would never read any of these books. Of course, my dad probably wouldn't ever read a book, but still, my husband, who is a dad, would not read most. Well, no, he probably would. He's messing up my argument again. But yeah, can we just get rid of those terms? Any kind of gendered term about the audience just doesn't need to be there. We don't need to gender our books that way or gender our reading audiences that way. Let people read what they want to read. There you go. Can we just stop? Can we just not? And then my final term that I'd kind of like to get out of the dialogue. It's interesting because I am one who uses this term, or has in the past, very recent past, used this term in one of my recent, I don't know if it's my most recent or my second most recent reading vlog, because I'm not sure when this video is going up. But you could actually watch me realize that this term I'm using is not a term I want to be using. And that is popcorn thriller. So the idea behind a popcorn thriller is it is a action-packed, fast-moving thriller that is just there for entertainment. It has nothing more. It's just entertaining. It doesn't have a lot of heft behind it. It's not saying a lot. It's just, you sit there with your popcorn and you eat it like a action movie, and that's it. And I started, as I was talking, and if you watch this video, I will put a card up to that video so you don't have to go searching for it. You kind of even see it in my mind, me figuring out what I'm actually doing here with the term popcorn thriller. When you call something a popcorn thriller, you're basically saying it's a lighter weight thriller than other thrillers, that it's not as good, it's not as serious as other books in the thriller category. And why are we making those distinctions? Yes, you can have a discussion about the quality of the book, the quality of the writing, the quality of the story mechanics, the story format, the plotting, the pacing, all that. You can have those discussions. And being bookish people, we should be having those discussions. I'm not saying not to do that, but I'm saying slapping labels on books like this. If I were to get a book, if someone were to hand me a book and say, it's a popcorn thriller, here's a popcorn thriller for you. That to me is not a serious book. That's just an entertainment. I don't want to use the term trashy because that's not really the same thing, but it's like light, brainless reading. And that's not fair. That is not fair an author may have poured their soul out for this book, and then without even reading it, it gets this label that it's a frivolous piece of work. Or maybe the author tried to write what we would consider a popcorn thriller, but it really spoke to a reader very deeply, and now we're saying that their feelings are frivolous. So let's just not. And I know okay, I may be oversensitive on this one, but we just should not do this. Can we just not say popcorn thriller or dad book or women's fiction or chick lit? If you say chick lit, you're not a bookish person. You've lost your bookish person card, because that term's no. So there. Okay. Here's my next one. And these next two, I'm not sure which one's spicier. I'm going to go with this one. This one should not be as spicy as the next one. I don't know. I'm just going to go for it. You can decide which one irks you more. So the first one of these two that I'm going to talk about is in regards to historical fiction. Historical fiction is one of my favorite genres. I love historical fiction, but I frequently hear people discuss exactly what is historical fiction. And I'm all for discussing the meanings of genre and exactly what that entails. I think that's a great bookish discussion. And my mouth is really dry. Darn allergies. Anyway, so I'm not at all criticizing the discussion around what exactly entails historical fiction. And I do think that people can have their own definition of what genres entail that works for themselves. Personally, my definition for historical fiction is probably held by me and me alone. I'm okay with that. No one needs, I mean, it's okay. I can consider a book, any book I want, historical fiction if it fits the definition I have. And my definition is not the issue here. What my issue is a lot of times when people start having these discussions, this idea comes up in the discussion, and that is like, when does something become historical? So frequently, and I have been told that this, I've had someone once tell me that this is like a hard and fast rule. It's not. That the events of the book have to take place more than 50 years prior. I vehemently do not agree with that. And I'm going to give you an example. We are in the year 2023, and a writer is writing a book about a historical event. It's a novel, but it's set around a historical event. That would be historical fiction, right? Well, let's say that historical fiction, that historical event that they're writing around is 9/11. Well, then that's not historical fiction by this weird arbitrary number of 50 years, because it's not old enough. And it's not, books don't change genres. Like, they just don't change genres. If it's a historical fiction or it's not historical fiction when it's written. So it doesn't become historical once you hit, 2061 or 2051. I can't do math. Anyway, so I don't believe that a novel, the events of a novel need to take place 50 years, at least 50 years previous for it to be considered historical fiction. What I do believe, and this is a very high level view of what I think historical fiction is, because I don't want to get into a debate about my personal views on it, because it doesn't matter. It's just my personal view, and there you go. I'm not putting it on anyone other than this. I do think historical fiction just needs to be tied to its time. It needs to take place it can only take place in the time in which it is set. A famous work of historical fiction, just as an example, let's see, famous work of historical fiction, Hilary Mantel, Wolf Hall. Wolf Hall takes place during the Tudor period. Could it take place during the Stuart period? No, it couldn't. And not just because it's the Stuarts and not the Tudors, and not just because Wolf Hall, the characters in Wolf Hall were real people, but the dynamics of that situation and the things that were going on in the world, even outside of the inner circle of what's happening in that action, only happened during that time. So it's historical fiction because it only takes place during that time. It is tied to its time. As you know, I always hear this, like, people read a book it'll be set in the 80s, and like, well, that's not historical because that was only in the 80s. It has to be at least 50 years. Okay. Just newsflash, the 80s are pretty close. They're not there yet, but they're pretty close to 50 years ago. And you saying because a book's set in the 80s, it's not historical, does not mean it's not historical. It means that you have not yet come to terms with the passing of time and how old you are. That's what it is. I mean, I know it hurts to hear the songs you heard growing up all played on the oldie station. I know that. I know it's kind of weird to think about your childhood as being historical. I get that. But it is what it is. That you can't just draw a line and say, no, I'm not going to acknowledge the fact that happened in the past. So yeah, historical fiction, this idea that the events have to be at least 50 years or longer ago, is just a stupid belief. The important thing is that the historical fiction, the events of the book, need to be tied to the time. There you go. Okay, let me take a drink of water before I start going off on the next one. Before I start this, I want to say that this did not, I get very angry when I hear this one, but I have never heard it on BookTube, so please don't come at me. I've never heard this on BookTube. I have heard it in other bookish places out there. I've heard it on message boards. I have heard it on podcasts, including one that it's not one I listen to anymore, but it's one that has a big following. And this comment drives me crazy. Well, a comment, part of this spicy take, but here's my spicy take. Classics is not a genre. Classic fiction is not a genre. There is no way Pride and Prejudice, Dracula, Don Quixote, Moby Dick, I don't know, I'm just randomly naming things, and The Great Gatsby can all be in the same genre. Dracula, did I say Dracula? Let's throw Dracula in there if I didn't, and maybe Frankenstein. And how about Metamorphosis? Those things, they cannot be, they're not the same genre. A genre is, it signifies a kind of book, and it has certain criteria that the books have to meet. So that's not a genre. I'm going to give you two definitions of classic literature, or classic book, classics. And one is mine, and then one is one that I pulled off a site called Language Humanities. So mine is a book that is at least 50 years old and still in print. That's all it is. That's, in my mind, that's what a classic is. And from Language Humanities, its definition is, it can be applied in a broad sense to any creative narrative that has either been given special recognition or deemed worthy of academic discussion. There's a few things in that I kind of don't agree with, but the gist of that is, it is a book that has elevated itself, that it lasts beyond, say, the sort of current lifespan of a book. That's all that is. That's just, classics is, it's not a genre. That's not to say I like classic novels. Great, I'm glad you do. There are people who read exclusively that. That's wonderful, but you're not just reading one genre. But what gets me, and this is what makes my blood boil, as people say, I just don't like classic literature. I'm big readers, but I just don't read classic literature. I don't like that genre. It's not a genre. It's a signifier. It's maybe even an honor to be considered, depending on how you define it. It's an honor to be considered a classic. But every piece of fiction that is considered a classic has its own genre, and that genre is not classic. It's not classics. It's something else. It's it's science fiction, it's fantasy, it's romance, it's contemporary at the time fiction, it's, whatever. It's not classics. It's not like a writer sat down and said, I'm going to write a classic. No, that's not the way it works. So when someone says, and as I said, I have heard people with a large following, not on BookTube, say, I don't like classics. I don't read classics. I don't like classics. What they're saying is, somewhere in the realm of, I don't like books that are at least 50 years old and still in print. Okay, maybe they don't. Maybe they don't, but I don't understand why that would be. I don't understand why you wouldn't like that. Doesn't make any sense. That's just publishing dates. Or I don't like books that have their creative their creative narrative has been given special recognition, or they discuss it in schools. Okay. Again, okay, I don't understand why that would be a turnoff for you. But no, and I understand. I do know that there are classics that are really intimidating. There are classics that are really hard to read. I'm not denying any of that, but the experience of reading War and Peace is very different than the experience of reading Little Women. Or the experience of reading Moll Flanders. I don't know, I'm just pulling titles out of my mind. It's very different than the experience of reading A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. Those are all classics. They're not all the same genre. They're all very, very different books. And in my mind, to just dismiss an entire branch of books of classics that have nothing in common makes no sense to me. So if you ever say, I just don't read classics, I'm gonna be like, what? And you might have a good reason. You might I only like to read books that were published this year. Okay, great, fine, whatever. But do understand when you say, I don't like classics, what you're really saying, because it's not what you think you are. Okay, my last one here. And this is the one where I'm pretty sure the pitchforks are gonna go. Because this is one I know people have really strong feelings about. I have a strong feeling about it, and I will explain after I go my whole explanation why I have a strong feeling about it. But in this particular case, my strong feeling is actually the official strong feeling about it. And here it is. Romance novels have to end with either a happily ever after or happily for now. If a book has an unhappy ending, then it is a love story. It is a book with romantic elements. It's any of those things, but it's not a romance. Capital R, romance. There may be romance in it, but it is not a romance novel. So, Romance Writers of America, if you go to their website, they have the definition of what makes a romance novel. And this is from the experts. This is from Romance Writers of America. They have 2 criteria. 1, a central love story. The main plot centers around individuals falling in love and struggling to make the relationship work. A writer can include many subplots as they want, as long as the love story is the main focus of the novel. So in this one, this is why Little Women is not a romance. I've seen some people say Little Women is a romance. It is not. Because the main, yes, Jo ends up with the guy. She gets a guy at the end. They're happily ever after. But the love story is not central. I mean, the romantic love story is not central. The familial love story between sisters is, but that's not romantic. That's why Little Women. So that is necessary. And here's the second criteria that the Romance Writers of America say is necessary for a romance novel. An emotionally satisfying and optimistic ending. In romance, the lovers who risk and struggle for each other and their relationships are rewarded with emotional justice and unconditional love. If a book does not have both of those characteristics, it is not a romance novel. I am not the one making that rule. That's Romance Writers of America. So I'm going to give you some examples of what are romances and what are not romances. And I'm going to go back to classic fiction because I think everyone's a little more familiar with that. So a romance would be anything by Jane Austen. They always get the guy in the end. Things happen, things go through, but the main character has her guy and it has a very optimistic ending. My mouth is dry, I'm sorry. Another example that I really wish was not true. I'm sorry. Like if I were the titular character in this book, I would not consider the ending happy, but it's very clear that the intent of the book was that the main character is happy with the end and who she ends up with. Jane Eyre. I know, Rochester is bleh, but she gets him at the end and she's optimistic and she's happy. Those are romances. So I'm going to give you 2 examples of classic novels that are, they're very, very frequently referred to as romances that are not romances. Number 1, and I've talked about this one before in my books that I disdain, because I do disdain this book, although there are things I appreciate about it. Gone with the Wind. And again, we're following my definition of a romance, or excuse me, of a classic, that it's 50 years old and still in print, which would make Gone with the Wind a classic. I don't know of any college class that discusses Gone with the Wind, but whatever. Gone with the Wind, I'm going to put spoiler here. And then if you actually have to turn this off, you skip ahead because you don't know how Gone with the Wind ends, please tell me, because I'm really curious if there's anyone in the world who doesn't know how Gone with the Wind ends. But here you go. I'm putting spoiler up. So here's how Gone with the Wind ends. Scarlett O'Hara, the person who is... Scarlett O'Hara is the closest thing that Scarlett O'Hara has to a best friend, has just died. This person was very loving and caring towards Scarlett O'Hara. Scarlett O'Hara hated her. And at one point, seriously considered leaving this person, Melanie, and Melanie's newborn son to die in the burning of Atlanta. Scarlett O'Hara was not a nice person. She made no beans about it. She did not try to be nice. So Melanie dies. Her best friend dies. The only person who's actually nice to Scarlett O'Hara dies. And then Scarlett O'Hara is like, maybe I should have been nicer to her. She actually was not a bad person after all. So then she's sad. And then she goes out and she realizes that because Melanie's now dead, Scarlett can have Melanie's husband, who she has been pining over for over a decade. And she realizes that she has wasted over a decade of her life mooning over this guy who's like totally flat and boring character. But he's just, you know, in love with his wife, and just, he's not for her. He's just not for Scarlett. He's not for Scarlett, and she's not in love with him after all. And now, and she can't believe she's wasted over 10 years of her life. But there is someone who she happens to be married to, so it's her husband, who has professed undying love to her, and is the only person who kind of sees her and accepts her as who she is, and has told her he wants nothing more than to have her love him unconditionally. So you think you're heading towards a happy ending? Well, no, you don't think you are, because you know how it ends. So she runs home to Rhett, and Rhett tells her, "You are a horrible human being, and I never want to see you again." And then he walks to the door, and she does this little like crying thing, little woe is me, I'm a little fragile flower thing that has always worked for her. She does that, and Rhett turns around to her and literally says, "My dear, I don't give a damn." He cinematically says, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn." And then he walks off. Scarlett has 30 seconds, so she does not end up with the guy at the end of this book. So right there, not a romance. And then she has her 30 seconds of crying and life is hard. And then she, you know, kind of sits up and says, "Okay, I'm going to go home. I'm going to regroup, and I'm going to get the guy." And admittedly, that's optimistic. And that is probably one of the qualities of Scarlett O'Hara as a character. She still doesn't have the guy. This is not a happily ever after. Gone with the Wind is not a romance. Also, just not great form. It's not uncommon, and it's not unheard of, but it's not great form to have the hero rape the heroine in a romance. It happens more than you think, but it shouldn't happen at all. Gone with the Wind, not a romance. The other one, oh, end of spoilers. There you go. Gone with the Wind, not a romance. The other one I am going to spoil, because if you haven't read it, you probably were assigned it in school or will be assigned it in school, and I'm not doing your homework for you, so spoilers. And that would be Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. You always see this talked about, a classic love story, a classic romance. You know, the movies are great, timeless romance. First of all, Emily Bronte did not write a love story. That was not her intent. Emily Bronte wrote a story about obsession. It's not about love anyway. So even just putting it in the realm of a love story is a gross misunderstanding of the intent of the writer. Also, if you go into it, reading it, knowing it's about obsession and not about love, you're gonna like the book a lot more. Just trust me. Trust me on that one. Secondly, if you know what happens at I'm gonna tell you what happens at the end of Wuthering Heights. Both the hero and the heroine are dead. And they're dead. And I'm sorry, unless this is some kind of weird paranormal romance where it's about ghosts, I think you need to stay alive for the whole thing for it to be considered a happily ever after. Yes, I know there's nothing more ever after than the afterlife. And Heathcliff and Kathy's ghost romping on the moors. You can have that little fantasy if you want. I like that little fantasy, and I actually would probably buy into it myself. Still not a romance. Did not live happily ever after. So, Wuthering Heights, not a romance. Gone with the Wind, not a romance. Now, I will leave it to you if you want to look at contemporary books, not contemporary romance, but books that are written in the contemporary period, and you decide. But I am going to tell you why this is important and why I feel very strongly about this. As I have said, in 2017, I read almost exclusively romance novels. And the reason I did that was because I was very stressed, very worried, very scared about kind of what the future would bring with the world. You know, 2017, you figure out what's going on. It's not that hard. You know what's going on. So I looked for comfort in romance novels. Romance novels are the one genre that is unfailingly optimistic. You know, mysteries are not optimistic, thrillers are not optimistic, horror is not optimistic, science fiction is not necessarily optimistic, fantasy is not necessarily optimistic, but romance novels are optimistic. And I was reading through romances and just kind of like plowing through them because I needed that kick at the end to know that everything, I could go through the story. Hard things might happen, but everything would be good, okay at the end. I emotionally needed that. And that is the definition of a romance novel. And then someone recommended a book to me. They said, this is a romance I really enjoyed. I think you would really like it. I'm like, yes, please give me more. And they recommended to me Me Before You by Jojo Moyes. I'm not going to spoil that book, but I'm going to tell you it's not a romance. It's a love story. I won't deny that. It is a love story. It's not a romance. And so that impact, I went in expecting something. And yes, I get that there's an appeal from time to time to have your expectations subverted, but not like this. Like, that's like the time, that to me is like the time I sent my husband to the store to buy chicken breasts and he came home with steak. It's like, what? No, not even, I still don't know what he was thinking with that one. When people approach the genre of romance, they are expecting certain things. And I'm not even going to go so far as to say that romance is as the most formulaic of the genres, because I don't even believe that. I think there are other genres can be just as formulaic. But if you don't deliver on the two things, there's only two things that you have to have in a romance novel. If you don't deliver on one of them, it's not a romance. Call it a love story, call it a novel with romantic elements, all of that. And I'm not even saying it's less than, I'm just saying it's not a romance novel. You can enjoy romance novels and you can enjoy novels with romantic elements that may not have happy endings. That's okay. You can enjoy both. It's just recognize that one of them is not a romance. They're two different things. Okay, my mouth is really dry. I'm gonna try and get this like up and ready to go. And I'm done. I'm done until I get teed off about something else. And then I will have another Spicy's opinion thing. I am kind of thinking I might do a spicy opinion video about like heroes we need to reconsider, like, you know, Rochester, or Rhett Butler, because they're problematic. I don't know. As soon as I get like mad about something, I'll do another spicy opinion video. But anyway, if you made it this far, give me a thumbs up. If you've not already subscribed to my channel, please subscribe to my channel. I rant and rave about things about 2 to 3 times a week. And if you have any comments or you really disagree with me or whatever, please, please, please comment. Just do it respectfully. I will respond respectfully. We're all grown-ups here. Let's just, you know, have an open discussion about it. I love having open discussions about it. So please do that. Just keep it classy. And unlike that, I will see you in the next video. Thank you very much.